Welcome to Beat Diabetes. I'm Dennis Pollock, and today I'm going to discuss why it is that I do not move to a zero-carb diet. Given the fact that I generally advocate a low-carb diet and believe that our world is poisoning themselves by eating way too many carbohydrate-rich foods. David Dykman is a young man who has worked with Dr. Richard Bernstein and is a type 1 diabetic himself. When he first found out that he was diabetic and heard his doctor telling him and his dad that carbs are the primary spikers of blood sugar, he innocently declared, "Well, I just won't eat carbs then." Neither his dad nor his doctor took him seriously at that point, but eventually, due to their education from Dr. Bernstein, they realized that he did indeed need to, well, if not cut out carbs altogether, at least restrict them significantly. It's a reasonable thought and one that many have been asking in the last 20 years. If carbs are really a problem for the diabetic, why not go low carb? Why not just eliminate them? And of course, this means to move to an all-meat, all-animal products diet. At one time, this was considered the very height of fanaticism and surely one of the most foolish things any person could ever do. But amazingly, as people actually tried an all-animal products diet, including meat, eggs, cream, cheese, and butter, they found that they did not drop dead in a month or two. In fact, their blood glucose went down, their triglycerides went down, their insulin levels retreated, and sometimes, although not always, their cholesterol scores improved. Plus, after a month or so of adjusting to this strange new diet, they started feeling terrific. So the question you may ask of me is, what about you, Dennis? Clearly you do eat vegetables, berries, nuts, and sometimes even beans. Why aren't you on board with this new zero-carb carnivore diet since you think carbs are such a problem? So today's little video will answer that question, and I will share 4 reasons why I still eat vegetables and some other plant-based foods. First, I have to tell you that I am an evangelical Christian with a deep respect and love for the Scriptures, and they tell me that the first diet given to men and women was a plant-based diet. In the first chapter of Genesis, God tells Adam and Eve, "See, I have given you every herb that yields seed which is on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food." Plant food was all that was on the menu in those early days of humankind. There were no steaks, no hamburgers, and apparently even fish was forbidden. These were granted to men and women after the flood of Noah, but in those early days it was clearly a whole foods, plant-based diet. Therefore, I cannot possibly accept the preposterous notion that all plant-based foods are evil and deleterious to our health. Some suggest that plant foods are just loaded with anti-nutrients and that anybody who eats them would be foolish. Well, I don't buy that now. I never have, and I never will. I don't have a problem with those who feel like the only way to good health and freedom from diabetes for them is to eat an all-meat diet, but I strongly oppose the idea that eating any kind of food that grows from the ground is inherently poisonous to human beings. A second reason I will not move to an all-meat or all-animal products diet is that it further limits my diet. When I discovered I had an excellent opportunity to become a diabetic, it wasn't long before I realized that carbohydrate-rich foods were not my friends. I cut sugar from my diet along with most bread. I quit eating pancakes and blueberry muffins. I no longer had cinnamon rolls or coconut pie in the evenings when I watched movies with my wife. Lasagna was off the menu, and even my birthday tradition of German chocolate cake had to be eliminated. You talk about sacrifices, I made plenty of them. All the while keeping a sharp eye on my post-meal glucose scores to see just what I had to give up. I discovered that meat was no problem for me. I could eat as much as I wanted and my glucose meter did not protest. But I also discovered that there were some foods from the plant family that still worked for me. Salads made with low-carb vegetables barely moved my glucose. In moderation, I could enjoy nuts of various kinds and see only a slight rise in my blood sugar. Yes, my diet was limited, much more so than it had been before when any and every food was allowed, but at least I was not limited to eating hamburger patties and eggs, and chicken and eggs, and fish and eggs, and steak and eggs. My diet still had many colors and textures and tastes. And this variety made it a whole lot easier for me to stick with this diet, and I believe that this is one reason I'm here today, over 20 years later, still eating low carb and still having the blood sugars and the A1C of normal people. The truth is, I don't need to eat an all-animal products diet. If I did need to eat this way to drop below diabetic levels, you can bet I would do it. But I don't. With an A1C around 5.0 and with fasting glucose usually below 100 milligrams per deciliter, I'm not doing it all bad for an old man. If someone told me, for example, you could really improve your health if you jogged 10 miles each day, I would say, why in the world would I do that? I'm healthy and my mind is still reasonably agile by using my treadmill for about 25 minutes most days. I've got too much going on in my life to spend several hours a day jogging when I don't need to. And I have no desire to make sacrifices that are unnecessary and don't really profit, at least not much. My glucose meter confirms that my low-carb diet is working for me even when I eat plant-based foods along with meat and eggs. Sometimes Benedicta will make a big pot of chicken and bean soup, usually with a couple of other ingredients in it. And we'll have this soup along with a few cheese slices for lunch almost an entire week. I know that beans can be a problem, so I do two things. First, I buy the beans with the most fiber, and in the store where I shop, that means small red beans, which contain fiber grams in the double digits. And second, Benedicta does not fill this soup with beans alone. The beans make up just one ingredient of several, so the bean soup looks like this, and not like this, filled with beans, beans, and more beans. In fact, we're eating this bean soup this week, and yesterday I tested my glucose peak after a meal of chicken and bean soup with several slices of cheese. This was after about an hour and 15 minutes, and my blood sugar read a scrawny 107 milligrams per deciliter. Salads are the same way. As long as the vegetables in the salad are fairly low carb, they do very little to spike my blood sugar. A third reason I prefer to eat a low-carb diet rather than a no-carb diet is that a diet of no carbs is unnatural, just as a diet of only plants is unnatural. Throughout the history of our world, whenever plants were all that was available, people ate plants. And when meat was all that was available, people ate animal products. A purely vegan culture is virtually unknown in our world, except when people eat that way for ideological or religious reasons. And a purely carnivore culture is equally rare. You may say, well, what about the Maasai tribe in East Africa? They live on meat and milk, even though they live in areas where berries and greens are available. Actually, that's not strictly true. When you Google what the Maasai eat, they usually list about 6 different foods, and one of those foods is tree bark, believe it or not. And some researchers have said that the Maasai people eat somewhere between 13 to 40% carbohydrate. So yes, they eat more protein and fat than they do carbs, but it's not that they eat zero carbs. A fourth reason that I'm not convinced that a purely animal products diet is ideal has to do with my own theory. It's not based on studies, it's based on a little logic and a little reason that makes sense to me, if not to anybody else. In our world, there is a natural law that says that whatever we do not use, we lose. Every part of our body has a purpose and is meant by our wise Creator to be used. This law is how men become bodybuilders. They may start out kind of skinny, but if they exercise and lift weights regularly, those muscles will grow. But the reverse is also true. Let's suppose that I injured my arm and decided that in order to get my arm to heal properly, I would tie it to my side and not use it at all for the next year. Surely, in 1 year's time, my arm would be as good as new, having had an entire year to rest. But after a year, I untie my arm from my body and take a good look at it. It is shriveled, atrophied, and can do very little. A lack of use has made my arm weaker, not stronger. Our arms and legs and even our minds were made to be used, and if we never use them, they become less efficient. Ben Hogan had a car accident that threatened his golf career. He was so banged up that many thought he would never walk again, let alone be able to play 18 holes of golf. But Hogan was determined to come back. He forced himself to walk and exercise despite the pain. Every day he kept pushing and walking and using his body. First around the room, and then around the block, and then further and further. Ben Hogan eventually got to the place where he could not only walk but play golf again very, very well. He played in many tournaments lasting 4 days and involving 72 holes of golf. And amazingly, Hogan won an incredible 6 of golf's major tournaments after recovering from his accident. There was a time when the standard advice for people who had heart attacks was to encourage them to rest and be totally inactive for several months. But they found that these people often suffered further heart attacks. When they were encouraged to get up and be reasonably active once it was safe for them to do so, they did much better. Your body was meant to move, not to lie still in a hospital bed for months at a time. Again, the principle is if you don't use your body, you lose efficiency, but if you use it, you keep it working as it should. Now, I believe that this is true for the pancreas. We were given a pancreas by God, and part of its job, along with other things, is to enable us to process carbohydrates. When God told our first parents, Adam and Eve, that He had given them plants as their foods, He didn't bother to explain the working of the pancreas to them. When they ate their plant-based meals, they never wondered how their blood sugar was faring or whether their pancreas was doing what it should be doing. They just ate those meals, and their pancreases did their job. And this must have worked very well because Adam lived 930 years, and presumably his pancreas worked well the entire time. But our pancreas was made to be used, not abused. To go for a brisk 30-minute walk on a pleasant day is using your body. To march through snow in sub-freezing temperatures for 48 hours straight is abuse. Likewise, for us to eat salads and beans in reasonable portions is use, but for us to gorge on donuts, chips, bread rolls, pretzels, cake, pie, and sugar-frosted flake cereal every day is abuse, and it will likely lead to obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, failing kidneys, compromised circulation, strokes, and heart attacks. And once you've crossed that terrible border into diabetes, you will probably have to limit your carbs for the rest of your life in a way that other people may not have to. And in some cases, a carnivore diet may be exactly what you need. But most of us can thrive on a low-carb diet, enjoying salads, occasional beans, strawberries, nuts, seeds, and green leafy vegetables. I've been living like this since 2002, and so far, by the grace of God, I'm doing pretty well. In addition to Beat Diabetes, Benedict and I do have another YouTube channel and another type of ministry. I'm referring to our Bible teaching channel, which goes by my name, Dennis Pollock. While you can only see Benedict with me on Beat Diabetes occasionally, you can see us study the Bible together at our dining room table every Thursday. With all that we're doing, producing hundreds of videos and podcasts, sponsoring African missions, helping diabetics reverse their diabetes, giving food to African widows, and sponsoring free medical clinics in Nigeria and Kenya, we need your help. Please consider making regular contributions to Spirit of Grace Ministries.